Every stockpile list you've ever seen skips the same 7 foods, not because they spoil, not because they're expensive, but because decades of health advice trained you to walk past them in the store. One of them was pushed on American families by their own government during a real crisis, then vanished so completely most people under 50 have never cooked it. 7 foods, and the last one has the strangest reversal of the whole list. None of these are exotic. All of them got pushed off the list for reasons that have nothing to do with whether they work. The guidance that shaped what's in your cart wasn't built for a stockpile, it was built for a lifetime of daily meals with full grocery access. Those are 2 different jobs, and they don't always agree. Number 7. Bouillon, or broth concentrate. Everyone's told to cut back on this. That advice was built for a person eating 3 balanced meals a day for 50 years, not a household living out of a stockpile for 2 weeks. Sodium isn't just a flavor, it's how the body replaces what stress, heat, and reduced food variety quietly drain away. Here's the part nobody plans for. A pantry can have every calorie it needs and still fail completely at dinner. Rice, beans, and pasta eaten meal after meal without anything to make them taste like food get left half-finished. The item that actually gets stored food eaten isn't a food at all. It's flavor. This isn't a case for ignoring sodium guidance in daily life. It's a reminder that a stockpile has a different job than a dinner plate. That's flavor solved. The next one got pushed off the list for the opposite reason because it's technically sugar. Number 6. Blackstrap molasses. It's dark, it's bitter, and it gets lumped in with every other added sugar warning on the shelf. But it's the least sugar-like sugar product that exists. White sugar is what's left after refining strips almost everything else out. Blackstrap molasses is what refining leaves behind, and what it leaves behind is iron, potassium, and calcium that plain sugar simply doesn't have. Most people skip it because it looks and tastes less appealing than the pale version, so the same warning label gets applied to both, even though they're nutritionally nothing alike. A stockpile heavy on plain starches can run low on iron over weeks of limited variety, and the fix has been sitting on a store shelf the whole time, unbought. A small jar goes a long way. This isn't about replacing sugar, it's about not skipping the one version that still does something for you. That's minerals covered. The next item was never really about nutrition. It was about how long a grain can actually survive before anyone touches it. Number 5. Whole wheat berries. Flour is the version everyone stockpiles. The unmilled grain it comes from lasts roughly 10 times longer, and almost nobody buys it that way. Milling exposes the oil-rich germ inside the grain to air, and that oil goes rancid, which is exactly why flour has a shelf life measured in months. Properly stored whole wheat berries can last 20 to 30 years. All-purpose flour milled from that same grain is realistically good for 6 to 12 months. Same grain. One version lasts a year, the other lasts a generation. Most people skip the whole grain version because it needs a grinder before it's useful, and that's one extra step nobody wants to think about before they actually need it. A 5-year-old bag of flour gone rancid, sitting next to a bag of whole grain that would have lasted the rest of the decade. That's the difference in one image. Keep both. Flour for near-term use. Whole grain with a hand grinder for the long haul. That's the grain that outlasts everything else in the pantry. The next item lasts almost as long, but it got pushed off lists for a completely different reason, because of what it's made of. Number 4. Full-fat powdered milk. Every stockpile list says powdered milk, and almost every one of them means the skim version, because that's the one health guidance approved of. Skim stores fine and delivers calories, but without the fat that makes a stored meal feel like actual food instead of a thin substitute. Full-fat dairy carries fat-soluble vitamins A and D, alongside its calories, nutrients. The skim version simply doesn't carry in the same amounts. The version on the shelf is the version the last 50 years of dietary guidance approved of. It isn't necessarily the version a stockpile needs. One real trade-off worth knowing. Full-fat versions can have a shorter shelf life than skim because of the fat content, so check dates and rotate. Reconstituted skim milk that tastes thin and unsatisfying turns a stored meal into something that feels like a ration. Sometimes the healthier everyday choice and the better emergency choice are genuinely different products, and that's fine. Look specifically for full-fat or whole milk powder instead of grabbing whatever's most visible on the shelf. That's the dairy question settled. The next item stops being about a single nutrient and starts being about an entire function this list has been building toward. Number 3. Plain white cane sugar. Modern wellness culture treats this as close to the villain of the whole pantry. which makes it the easiest thing on any list to feel virtuous about skipping. But in a stockpile, sugar isn't doing a nutrition job, it's doing a chemistry job. Sugar draws water out of fruit through osmosis. That's the actual mechanism that lets jam and preserves resist spoilage. It's a tool, not a treat, in this specific context. The ingredient getting blamed for spoiling your health is the same ingredient that keeps your food from spoiling. Cut sugar messaging is broad and constant enough that people apply it everywhere, including the one context where it isn't doing what people assume. A summer of garden produce with no way to preserve any of it, because the one bag that makes canning work got left off the list on principle. That's what a pantry missing this looks like. This isn't a case for eating more sugar day to day. It's a case for not skipping the bag that makes your own preserving actually work. That's preservation covered. The next item has the most documented reversal of anything on this list, because it went from official policy to unofficially banned in one generation. Number 2, lard or rendered tallow. For most of American history, this was the default cooking fat in nearly every kitchen. Then, in 1977, the U.S. Dietary Goals, commonly known as the McGovern Report, recommended cutting saturated fat to about 10% of calories. That recommendation became the foundation of the official dietary guidelines for Americans issued in 1980. The numbers tell the story on their own. Lard consumption fell 78% between 1909 and 2010. Butter fell 68% over the same stretch. Margarine, shortening, and vegetable oil all rose sharply to fill the gap. One report, and 8 decades of a kitchen staple, quietly reversed inside a single generation. This isn't a health claim about which fat is better. That's a different debate. The point is simpler. A pantry can be full of flour and grain and still be missing the one ingredient that turns any of it into something that actually satisfies. Properly rendered and sealed, this stores for a very long time at room temperature. Its absence from most kitchens isn't about spoilage. It's about a documented policy shift that most people alive today have never had a reason to question. That's the biggest reversal on this list. Until the last one, because the next item wasn't just discouraged. It was promoted by the government first, before it disappeared. Number 1. Canned organ meat or liver pâté. This is the food from the cold open. During World War II, the U.S. government ran an actual campaign encouraging American families to eat organ meat specifically because the country's muscle meat was being sent to soldiers overseas. For a generation afterward, it stayed a normal part of the American table. Then supermarkets started favoring uniform, easy-to-package cuts, and organ meat got quietly marketed out of the picture. U.S. organ meat consumption has fallen from roughly 50 grams per person per week in the 1970s to about 5 grams per week today, something close to a 90% decline. And here's what makes that decline strange rather than sensible. Gram for gram, organ meat, like beef liver, carries far more potassium, iron, zinc, vitamin D, and vitamin B12 than a comparable amount of kale. The food the government once asked you to eat now gets skipped in favor of a leafy green that isn't in the same nutritional category at all. The stigma runs deep enough that people who'd never say no to a steak will say no to liver on reflex, without ever tasting a well-prepared version. A canned pâté or spread needs no cooking skill, and stores easily. The barrier here was never practical. It was marketing. A well-stocked pantry can still be quietly missing the density of iron and B12 that helps someone actually get through weeks of limited variety. This is the single most nutrient-dense protein on this entire list, and the one most people have never once considered buying, not because it doesn't work, but because it stopped being sold to us. 7 foods. Bouillon for flavor, blackstrap molasses for minerals, whole wheat berries for the long haul, full-fat milk powder for real calories, sugar for preservation, lard for the fat that makes food satisfying, and organ meat for the density nothing else on this list can match. None of it is enough on its own. Flavor without sodium doesn't get eaten. Minerals stripped by refining don't come back by themselves. Convenience milled grain doesn't outlast the 10-year mark. Skim calories don't satisfy the way full-fat ones do. A pantry that can't preserve fresh food loses its own resupply chain. Carbohydrates without fat don't sustain anyone for long. And none of it reaches the density of a food group that disappeared for marketing reasons, not medical ones. None of this is an argument against modern nutrition science. It's a reminder that the guidance built for a lifetime of daily meals isn't automatically the same guidance a stockpile needs. Pick one item from this list you've never bought and add it to your next grocery trip, not all 7 at once, just one. Which of these have you already been avoiding without really knowing why? Tell me in the comments.